You know, it's funny how in our day-to-day lives we use these simple little words that carry so much power. The power to command, to advise, to oblige. But what happens when that line between a friendly suggestion and an ironclad rule gets, well, kind of blurry? Today we're going to decode the hidden language of obligation. And it all starts with a simple question.
And really, that's the big question, isn't it? It sounds like a riddle, but figuring out the answer is absolutely crucial, especially when the stakes are high. We're talking legal matters, immigration, or even just trying to figure out the rules at a new job. The words people choose can create completely different realities.
Just imagine this for a second. Is the official just giving you some good advice, trying to be helpful, or is failing to keep those copies going to completely jeopardize your entire application? That one word, should, is just hanging there in the air, totally ambiguous, and this is exactly why we need to nail down the difference between a suggestion and a command.
So these words we're talking about, must, have to, should, ought to, they have a name. They're called obligation modals. They're these special verbs that tell us the exact level of necessity. They are literally the difference between a rule and a recommendation. And, as you can imagine, getting them wrong can have some pretty huge consequences.
Okay, let's start at the very top of the ladder with the real heavyweights, must and have to. When you hear these, you know it's an absolute requirement. These are not optional. But here's the thing. While they seem almost identical, the source of that obligation is subtly and really importantly different.
Must is the voice of direct authority. Think of it as a command coming straight from a specific source, like a law, a set of regulations, or a person who's in charge. It feels formal, it feels official, and it's very direct.
So what are the key giveaways for must? Well, first, the source is official, laws and rules. It's almost always more formal. And grammatically, it's a bit of a one-trick pony. It really only works in the present tense. These examples here, they're totally non-negotiable legal requirements. There is zero room for interpretation.
Now let's look at its close cousin, have to. It's just as strong as must, but the obligation here doesn't come from the speaker's personal authority. Nope. It comes from some kind of external situation, a general rule, or circumstance that's forcing the action.
And you'll notice right away that have to is way more flexible. It feels less formal, which is why we use it in conversation all the time. And unlike must, it works in any tense you want, past, present, or future. So when you say she has to renew her visa, you're not giving an order, you're just stating a fact, a necessity created by outside rules.
So let's put them side by side. It really all boils down to the source of the obligation. Must is that direct command you'll see in written rules and official documents. Have to is what we say when we're talking about a necessity that the world has imposed on us. One is for writing, the other's for talking.
Okay, we've tackled the heavy hitters. Now let's move down the ladder a little bit. We're now entering the territory of advice and recommendations. These words aren't about absolute rules anymore. They're all about what's considered a good idea.
Should is probably the one you hear the most. It's the classic word for giving advice. When you use should, what you're really saying is, hey, this is the wise or correct thing to do. But you're still giving the other person a choice. It's a strong suggestion for sure, but it's not a command.
So yeah, should is definitely weaker than must, but it is incredibly versatile. It works for super practical advice, like you should consult a lawyer, but it also works for expressing a big moral idea, like countries should protect refugees. It's a powerful recommendation, not a requirement.
And then we have its slightly more formal, less common twin, ought to. It means almost the exact same thing as should, but it feels a bit more buttoned up, maybe a little old-fashioned, and it often carries a much stronger sense of moral duty.
Ought to is perfect for when you're talking about what is morally right or just. You probably wouldn't tell your friend they ought to try a new pizza place, right? But you would say a government ought to uphold justice. It just adds this distinct weight of moral expectation.
So when you put them next to each other, the real difference isn't about the meaning, it's about the flavor, the vibe. Should is your everyday all-purpose tool for giving advice. Ought to is the one you pull out for those more formal or deeply moral discussions.
All right, so we've looked at all the individual pieces of the puzzle. Now let's put them all together and see how they create a complete system. We're going to lay everything out on one spectrum to make it all crystal clear.
This chart right here, this is basically your Rosetta Stone for obligation. It lays everything out perfectly. Up at the top, you've got your absolute requirements, must and have to. Down at the bottom, your strong recommendations, should and ought to. Just look at how it clearly shows you the strength, the source, and the formality of each one. Another great way to picture this is as a simple ladder. You start with the strongest command at the top, must. and you climb all the way down to the moral advice at the bottom, ought to. Thinking of it as this ladder of decreasing obligation is a really powerful way to keep it all straight in your head.
So you might be thinking, okay, that's interesting grammar, but why did we just spend all this time on 4 little words? Well, because understanding this stuff isn't just an academic exercise. It has a huge impact on how we understand power and expectations and even our relationships.
Seriously, think about it. When your boss says you should finish a report, are they just giving friendly advice? When a friend says you must call them back, what are they really saying? Knowing the difference empowers you to navigate all these little interactions every single day.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought, a little challenge. Now that you have the tools to decode the language of obligation, start listening for it. The next time you hear someone use that word should, just pause for a second and ask yourself, is that just advice or is it an obligation in disguise? You might be really surprised by what you find.